everybody. I am happy to have the opportunity to speak with you tonight. So let's see if I can get this going here. Yeah, okay. Tonight, I am going to give a discussion, a lesson on contentment. And it is a lesson that you've heard me give before, finding contentment in a discontent world. And I do like what the song we just sang talked about, because it talked about everything that we have and we give that back to God. And so rather than having just a selfish attitude about what we have, that song speaks about what we want to give back. So tonight, I like this study because it really teaches something to me and hopefully to you as well. The quote that I have on the board is from a American historian, Arthur Schlesinger, and he says that the American society is marked by inextinguishable discontent. Okay, and that's a pretty strong way to say it, but I think it's accurate, because this is kind of what we see in the world around us, because everybody that we work with, that we hang out with, always wants more and more, and they're thinking about themselves and what they can get rather than what they can perhaps give and provide to the world. People just aren't satisfied, and they don't have that attitude of contentment. Let's get a slide here. Okay, I'm sure that it'll work in a second. Yeah, okay, all right, here we go. This is interesting thing here, satisfaction with personal life, and it just simply says what we want versus what we have. And so this just tells us that, really, if you can see at the bottom, I'm sorry to make that larger, but when you get to family, I guess a lot of people are happy with their family. Thankfully, 62%, right? That's a pretty good number. But when you get down to religion, like 50% happy, then personal growth, career, you get all the way down to the bottom, and money's at the bottom, and it's 14% contentment, okay? And so that is like really low. So you can see kind of the way that people tend to think about the world in today's life. And here's our title slide that I should have had up first, and I apologize about that. Finding contentment in a discontent world, when we're surrounded by all of this kind of thought around us. In a book that I listened to at least a portion of, called The Age of Discontent, the author Matthew Rhodes has a quote here. He says a lot of good things. He says, people should be careful about the things that they say. They should be careful about their rhetoric. But he has a great quote. He says here, I think people should think before you use aggressive and violent language. Okay? Very, very important point, which we're familiar with, but this is what people tend to do when they're discontent. They fight about what they want. They are very high-strung about the things that they want, and they have this attitude that whatever I want, I also deserve, okay? And that's kind of an important point about what we'll talk about here tonight, because really, you're all here because you know that we don't deserve the very best things in life. We don't deserve for God to give us all the blessings that He has. But in today's world, the attitude is, I deserve it, give it to me now. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with. So to start, let's look at the definition of what is contentment. And we're going to look at Philippians 4:12. Paul says here in Philippians 4:12, I have learned the secret of being content in any every situation. Now, what I like most about this is that Paul uses the word secret. Okay, I think that's important, that Paul uses the word secret, the secret of being content. And I think what he means by that, honestly, is that it's no mystery that we're confused by this, right? It doesn't come to our very nature that we are naturally content. And so Paul describes it as a secret. It's so mysterious to the natural man, if you will, that contentment is a secret, because the natural man wants to fight for whatever he can get. The Greek word here is used by Paul as autarkes, and it's a combination of autos, which is self, and archeo, which is sufficient. So it's just an attitude of being self-satisfied. Self-sufficiency. And so Paul says, rather than being like just relying only on self, he says, you know what's valuable to me? The surpassing worth of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord. That's what Paul says is important. And so while we find in ourselves that discontentment is actually natural, you know, we see that from children, right? Because they grow up, they're discontent because they can't provide the things that they need to survive. And so they seem discontent when they, yell or cry for the things they need. It is the only mechanism they have. And so discontentment comes naturally. It's just what it is. But what is unnatural, what's the secret, is contentment, which takes actual practice and learning, and honestly, a complete change of perspective. To share this a little bit, I found some people over history that are way smarter than I am and thought it would be interesting. Socrates says, I got his year of life here, 400 BC approximately, says, he who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have. Okay, so think about that, because we're talking about controlling desires. He who's not contented with what he has will not be contented with what he would like to have. Also, Epictetus, a Roman philosopher, also said this: he is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. And so an attitude of thankfulness here is what we're talking about. And I had another quote, which I meant to put on here but didn't, from G.K. Chesterton, right? A British theologian, 1874 to 1936. And he says, there are two ways to get enough. One is to continue to accumulate more and more. The other is to desire less. And so we kind of see the thought that we're looking at here. Now I want to follow up Paul's statement about his understanding that contentment doesn't come from being dependent on things, on material things, but on a focus on God. Okay? So we read verse 10 a second ago. We're going to pick up 11 through 14. Paul says, not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Okay, that verse that we read all the time that's often taken out of context. But he says, nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction. So what's interesting here, and what I want to highlight, is that Paul obviously understands that you need things. Paul knows that I need things. Paul knows that we have to, that some circumstances are easy and that some circumstances are hard. But Paul understands the meaning of both, okay? And he appreciates it. And that's what he's talking about in this sort of expounding upon the secret of contentment, right? The thing that is hard to learn is that we can actually be content and satisfied even when we have a lack of prosperity or when we have prosperity. And that's what Paul is teaching us here. Another verse, Hebrews 13. Of course, we've been doing our Hebrew study on Wednesday nights. Hebrews 13:5 says about your character. Make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. The writer of Hebrews here simply says, don't rely solely on your money. Money is not the stability of life. I know that everyone knows that, in this world, we have to have money to live. That's true. The problem here is not that money is the problem, but rather that the love and the all-encompassing mental pursuit of it is the issue. And what does it do? It takes our trust away from God, right, who will actually truly provide for us. The writer here is referencing Deuteronomy 31:6, which says, be strong and courageous. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. This is an excellent lesson to us on how to understand our personal character, right? It is, we'll talk about it in a couple minutes, but it is okay to work. It's great, it's required to work, right, with a good attitude. But we do it with the proper attitude, and that's real Christian contentment character, to understand that God is the stability of our life. I want to talk briefly about contentment versus complacency, because knowing that God will see after our needs, right, and that we don't have to care solely about money, this verse is interesting to me. Psalm 23:1. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So I just want to ask the question, is a Christian allowed to want, right? In what way are we allowed to want? I want to think about that for a second. Okay? So contentment versus complacency here. Complacency is an uncritical satisfaction of oneself. Okay? This means that we're pleased with where we are without an awareness of defects in the plan. Okay? It would mean that we truly just don't want to make them better. That's complacency, and that's not the same thing as contentment. And I think there are actually a lot of verses that talk about how a Christian should always have a spirit of betterment, right? A spirit of improvement, both spiritually and physically. And I want to look at those. Revelation 3:15. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. So because you're lukewarm and neither cold or hot, I will spit you out of my mouth, right? Asking for them to be passionate about this, to be driven. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, and this speaks to all of us even today, whatever you do your work heartily as to the Lord rather than for men. So can a follower of God work hard? Well, absolutely. You should and you have to. And I know this is not news to any of you, but we have a call to really be like excellent workers, maybe the best workers in your company, right? That's what we should try to be based on whatever criteria you want to talk about, right? Honesty, obviously, right? Productivity, sure, right? But to be respect to your coworkers, respect to your authority figures, that's absolutely true, especially when you look through Ephesians 4 and 5 and others, right? Where we talk about that working relationship. So whatever you do your work heartily as to the Lord rather than for men. In fact, when God, made man, right? It gave him a job. It's like first task, okay? Then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. So yeah, like first day on the job, he's working. That's just how it is. Proverbs 14:23. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. Okay? A lot of people are good at talking, making plans, dreaming, and that's all fine, dreaming and scheming and all this. But the problem is if you're only all about talk, right? And if you don't actually get to the work of the work. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. So what I'm trying to say here is that the Bible recognizes that hard work is actually a good thing, okay? And it's actually fine. We should be examples of hard work and productivity. That is definitely okay. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his own house of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Very familiar verse. 2 Timothy 2:5, "If anyone competes as an athlete, he does not win the prize unless he competes according to the rules. The hard-working farmer ought to be the first to receive the share of the crops." So, what do we see here? The Bible doesn't warn against hard work. It doesn't warn against goals. It doesn't warn against trying to make yourself better in physical ways. In fact, it says it's a good thing because we do that to support families, to support church, to give at church, to help others, right? That's the focus for it. Again, we can be a content Christian, but we're not a complacent Christian. Just for clarity, we're satisfied certainly mentally because our reliance comes from God, but we're allowed to also make plans of betterment, if you will. So, can a Christian be a business owner, operator, all that kind of stuff, scientist, etc.? Absolutely. All of us have different gifts that were given by God, different abilities. We're allowed to use those, right, to His glory. We're allowed to, obviously, go to college, focus something that we know that God's given us a mind for, and we can do that and focus on it, and then use that money, the kind of effect that we can have on our coworkers, right, to influence them, and that's the opportunity that we have. So, biblical contentment has nothing to do with complacency. So, what does contentment really mean? Contentment comes from reliance on God, of course. So, not gain, right? We don't do those things. We don't work hard for the gain. We work hard because God has given us opportunity. But contentment comes from a reliance on God. As we've said, a lot of people around us are discontent because they just want everything now. They're thinking about themselves. Their range of thought is not on God. But true contentment is outside of the realm of material goods. As we learned a second ago in Philippians 4, Paul says whether going through good times or bad, he's learned real contentment, and that's reliance on God. And so to have true contentment, we have to put our trust in God. 1 Peter 2:9 says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God." Do you find it interesting that we're so important to God? I mean, I do, because of course, if you listen to too many people out there in the world, they'll say, the universe is so big, you don't matter because you're such a tiny part of the entire universe. Okay? We're so small in relation to all that exists in the world. And so then people around us can often say, because of that, obviously, you don't matter, or you matter very little. But that's not true. When you have a relationship with God and a reliance on God, what do we know? We know that God made a plan for us. He even made us, I'm about to say, in His image. I was thinking about that a little bit. I wish I had some slides, but it's like, you know what? Like a bird. A bird is cool. Maybe it's like a bald eagle, can fly fast. But God didn't make a bald eagle in His image, okay? Right? You can go to the zoo and see a giraffe, and they're pretty cool. It's super tall, right? Like 14 feet tall. But God didn't make them in His image. A lion is super powerful, and when we're at the zoo, we love hearing them growl, and they represent strength, right? And the pinnacle of the animal kingdom. But God didn't make a lion in His image. No. He made man in His image. And so while this may fly in the face of what our friends and coworkers think, that we don't matter, and kind of like what I talked about at the invitation at the singing night, many of our friends and coworkers believe that, again, humanity will eventually die and the universe will just fade away. And so because of that, we don't matter. But to God, we matter. And because, He loved us, we should put our trust in Him. We belong to Him. He loves us. We should love Him. Matthew 6:31, "Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat? Or what will we drink? Or what will we wear for clothing? For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things. For your heavenly Father knows that you need these things. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." Okay? So God is aware of our needs. And again, He's given us blessings. I know that everyone realizes that the verse doesn't mean that we're just going to sit around in a chair and food and clothing will literally materialize before us, because God is not a magic genie. But God gives us benefits, and He gives us our mind, and He gives us ways that we can, again, provide for ourselves without being solely focused on providing for ourselves. Another way is to simply just be thankful to how we show our contentment, how we practice contentment in our reliance for God is in our thankfulness. 1 Thessalonians 5:16 says, "Be joyful always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." This is important because for all of us, we need to know that we aren't the source of all the good stuff in our life, right? We're not here just because of me or you or so forth, right? We are here because of God. And we need to show that. We need to realize that. Because I would say, actually, so going back to what I was talking about, where we're small within the universe, if you're without God, it's a very scary thing to reject God again, who sees you as important. But again, without God, we do not have the same hope, the things that give us the importance that we have, because we don't get to take advantage of all of God's blessings. So certainly there is danger if we are rejecting God and see ourselves as the reason for it all. And at the end of that life, there's nothing, right? There's nothing there. And everything by prayer, Philippians 4:6, and everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And on a last point about how we can show our contentment and our reliance on God is sharing and harmony with others. Okay? So a major challenge is dealing with everybody around us, right? Many people have a sense of entitlement. It's just a big part of where we are in the world right now, and everybody feels like they deserve whatever they get. Entitlement is the belief that one is inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. Okay? 2 Corinthians 13:11 says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, rejoice, strive for full restoration, encourage one another, be of one mind, and live for peace." So again, our contentment, is not based on our entitlement. It's not based on the fact that we feel like we deserve everything. We're given blessings from God. And so in that, we need to be mindful of it and share this joy with others around us, encouraging one another. And Paul, writing 2 Corinthians here, also says, be of one mind, right? To be in general agreement. We all have different minds, and I get that. We have different abilities, we have different backgrounds, and that kind of thing. But he says, be of one mind, or be of one focus. A similar verse that he writes in Philippians 2:2 says, "Then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit, and of one mind," right? To be in an agreement and to have similar goal sharing among us as we kind of work for contentment. Because again, if we're only self-focused, then we never pay attention to anyone else. That's the biggest problem with selfishness, is that we're not aware of others' needs. We're not aware of others in the congregation. 1 John 3:17, "If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him?" So this sort of captures many of the things that we've talked about here. If we're only self-focused, if we only see material possessions as the way to be content, we're missing the target completely. Okay? Because everything that we have is because of God. Everything that we have is from God. And even if you start thinking, well, you should see my brain. I've got a great brain, right? That is from God. And so we all need to have, our mind on others and not only ourselves. And so here it says, if we see someone in need and simply don't have pity, that person is showing that the love of God is not in them. A very dangerous attitude. Tonight, simple and short lesson generally. I think that you agree that it's a tough world out there. It is a discontent world. It's a selfish world, and so then we have to come into that world and our various ways and offer the light of God to that, right? Show them the fact that, contentment is not based on you and your things that you don't have or the things that you think you deserve but don't have. Tonight we've learned that commitment comes from a reliance on God and not gain. It's not complacency, as I said. It's actual contentment. And it's a reflection of our trust in God. It's also a reflection of our thankfulness and of our harmony with others, because that is how, if we're going to have the right attitude and if we're going to stop looking to ourselves for all of our sufficiency, right? We need to look to God and then look to others and see how we can be aware of their needs. So again, tonight, a lesson about how we can practice contentment. Now, there's only one exception to the rule that I jotted down here. If you're not saved tonight, you're not allowed to be content. Okay? So, sorry. You should be discontent with that, because that also goes against everything we've talked about tonight. Tonight we should be able to say, the Lord is my shepherd. I have enough, right? The Lord is my shepherd. I'm good. I shall not want. And that's not saying that we can't, again, work for things, because we talked about all the verses that teach us that we should. We should work for those things. That's a good thing to do. That's fine. But we need to know that our sufficiency comes from God. So tonight, I hope this lesson has been helpful to you. I really do. If you are struggling with any issues, selfishness, of course, then you should think about that. And I hope it's a helpful lesson to you in your life, and how maybe you can exercise this to grow in your Christian life. So if you need the prayers of the church, we would have an open invitation here. Also, if you're not a baptized, immersed believer, we have this opportunity at the end of every service, just so that you know that you can come forward and change your life, right? Change your life so that you can be part of God's future that He planned for you. The reason that He made you in His image is so that you can be with Him. So again, if you are a person of either need, please feel welcome to come forward at this time.